Jason X, Chapter 14. Such a waste. Rowan looked up at Lowe sharply, not quite sure that she had heard him correctly, or had she just imagined he had said anything at all. She glanced around at the others for their reactions, but their expressions told her nothing she didn't already know. Her gaze came to rest on Cineron. She thought that he might be on the verge of speaking. Instead, he simply leaned forward and shut off the console speaker, which was now broadcasting nothing but static. The silence in the laboratory deepened. I told him to stay calm. This time, the sound of Lowe's voice startled her enough to make her jump slightly. She stared at him in bewilderment, wondering if he knew he wasn't making any sense. I told him to wait until we reached Solaris, Lowe went on, his tone maddeningly reasonable. Then we could take care of this monster. I said, don't go in unprepared. That's what I told him. He turned to look at Rowan as if he expected her to back him up on this. She stared back at him, giving him serious consideration to slapping his face. Lowe shook his head. Brodsky was just too proud. Just too damn proud. Slapping him wouldn't do any good, Rowan thought. What he really needed was a solid punch. She actually started to take a step towards him when suddenly something pounded heavily on the lab door. Everyone screamed. A moment later, a very human, slightly muffled voice called out, "Hey, who locked the damn door?" "It's Crutch," Janessa said, addressing no one in particular. He's the co-pilot," Cineron added in response to Rowan's puzzled look and went over to let him in. Rowan thought the man who came in looked more like an overweight gypsy fortune-teller than a co-pilot. He also looked 100% freaked out. Obviously, Jason had crossed his path too. "Somebody tell me what the hell is going on here, seriously," he demanded. His gaze barely lingered on her unfamiliar face as he looked around at everyone. "The ex-grunts are dead," Cineron told him. The co-pilot stared at him incredulously. "Which ones?" "All of them." He looked searchingly at all the other faces in the room again. "Oh, Jesus," he said finally, reaching out blindly for something to lean on. He found a chair and half fell into it. "Oh, man." Abruptly, Lowe went over to the console and hit a switch. "Lou, how much longer before we reach Solaris?" "I'm about to bring us out of hyperdrive right about now," replied the pilot. So far, his was the calmest voice Rowan had heard in the last few minutes. She hoped that wasn't simply because he was the only one who didn't know what was going on. "Well, that's okay then," the co-pilot said, his voice only a little shaky. "We'll be all right. Brodsky and his guys trapped it in the cargo bay, and we're locked in here. We're safe, right?" "Will the Solaris grunts be able to kill him?" Kinsa asked in a small, weepy voice. "Absolutely," Lowe said quickly. "Relax, people. I've been in constant contact with Solaris. They have 60 highly trained professionals standing by to get us off this ship. Everything is going to be all right." Rowan squeezed her eyes shut. God, but she wished he'd stop saying things like that. Or didn't he think Jason was killing them off all quickly enough? On the bridge, Lou had finally reached the limit of his good humor. He was also beginning to understand why so many of his fellow pilots maintained their bad tempers no matter what. When was the last time this kind of thing happened to any of them? Right? Never. And it never would. But him, good old happy-go-lucky Lou Goddard, he might as well have had a target tattooed on both his forehead and an ass, so people could get him coming and going. "Damn Lowe and his damn kids and his goddamn field trips," he muttered. "Oh, sure, bring a psycho on board. Nice extra credit project, Teach. I can just guess who's going to get stuck cleaning up this mess, and they'll probably blame me for it, too." Solaris was large in the viewport in front of him. Just beyond it was the arc of Earth 2 and Crescent. Both looked great to Lou. His comm unit crackled to life. "Solaris to Grendel. We have you on approach. Stand by for docking procedure." "Grendel to Solaris. Roger that. We need plenty of medical and military to meet us at the gate," Lou said. "We've got a big goddamn problem here. A real goat fuck." "What kind of problem, Grendel? Over?" What kind of problem? Lowe gave a short, humorless laugh. Glad you asked that question, Solaris. What a goddamn goat fuck of a day I've had. He opened his mouth to break it down for them when he heard someone come in behind him. That was all he needed now, some student poking around and getting in the way. This was the perfect time for a demonstration of his new not-so-happy-go-lucky attitude. He twisted around and looked up. Repeat, what kind of problem, Grindel? What kind of problem? They wanted to know. Even if his mouth hadn't been too dry for him to speak, he could not have answered. There was no way to sum up in a few succinct words what kind of problem he had. Considering that Kicker had described the chick as cute, this had to be the other viable that Lowe had insisted on bringing on board. As far as Lowe was concerned, it was also incontrovertible proof that Lowe had shit for brains. Anyone with real brains would have taken one look at this thing and left it right where it was, and in one big frickin' hurry, even if they hadn't been lucky enough to recover a cute chick. Was she cute? Lowe hoped so. He hoped like anything that she was as cute as this thing was ugly. All of that, plus his entire personal history to date, went through his mind in less than a second. Then, he went to pieces. Solaris to Grindel, pull off and decrease approach speed. Over. Rowan looked over at the speaker on the console. There was a sensation in her chest as if an enormous hand had somehow reached inside and taken hold of her heart. She had one excruciatingly brief moment of hope that what she heard was nowhere near as scary as it seemed to her. That as a stranger in these parts, she simply didn't know a routine docking transmission when she heard one. But the moment was over even before the voice spoke again. Grindel, decrease approach. Your speed needs to slow down right now. You're coming in too hot. Pull off. Repeat. Pull off. She turned to Soneron, but he and Waylander were lunging towards a monitor at a different console. Alarm bells began ringing loudly, and she saw Kinsa drop to the floor and cover her head with both hands. Was that proper emergency procedure in a spacecraft? Rowan wondered. Apparently not, since Janessa was trying to haul her back up on her feet. Oh, man! Waylander yelled over the still ringing alarms. Look out, everybody! Brace yourselves! Now Janessa was diving for the floor herself, along with everyone else. Rowan tried to do likewise, but for some reason her legs wouldn't obey. All at once her inner ear went crazy and told her that the room and everything in it was now tilted at a 45-degree angle. Her eyes were trying to roll up in her head as her vertigo intensified. Someone was screaming in terror. No, several people, including herself. She was falling. No, almost falling. Then she was flying. She only went a few feet before she hit the floor again and rolled over and over as the entire ship rocked and shuddered from side to side as some kind of tremendous impact hit the ship. The noise completely drowned out the alarms, although later on Rowan remembered the din more as something she felt rather than heard. Or was deafened by, perhaps. But she hadn't felt deafened at the time. Not then, and not immediately after it came to an end. Her ears hadn't been ringing, and everything hadn't sounded muffled, as if she were wearing thick earmuffs. It was more as if she had been part of a loud crash or explosion, as opposed to just hearing it, as if she had served as the medium that carried the sound. In space, she thought dazedly, no one can hear, well, anything, because space was a vacuum and sound couldn't travel in a vacuum. She had come to rest face down on the cold, polished floor. Cautiously, she tried lifting her head a few inches, only to have her inner ear go crazy on her again. Pressing her cheek firmly against the floor, she tried to get a sense of her body. Or was this the floor? She wondered suddenly. Had the ship rolled over? Abruptly, she felt her body slide a short distance and then come to a stop against another hard surface. Another intense wave of vertigo swept through her, and her stomach threatened to empty itself despite the fact that there was nothing in it. Then everything snapped back into focus, and she found herself sitting in a heap against the lab's forward wall. People were scattered all over the lab, looking around with wide, fearful eyes, except for Lowe, who was clinging to the medical bed and whimpering. She started to say something, anything, just to see if she could, when all at once there was another impact. The lights flickered, and she was tumbling across the floor towards the opposite wall. This time she fetched up against the base of one of the immovable console chairs. Some impulse made her hang on to it with all her strength, while the ship juddered violently all around her. The lights came on, flickered, and went out again, but not before she had time to see KM pass directly over her head and slam into the controls for the medical bed. Sparks showered down on her as she dropped onto the bed and then rolled off onto the floor. A second later, Rowan saw her stand up and begin brushing fragments from the damaged equipment from her uniform in a most unruffled, matter-of-fact way. The lights flickered again, trying to go back on, and then died altogether, leaving the room in total darkness. Gripping the chair, Rowan closed her eyes and waited for another impact or an explosion or the hiss of air escaping as the ship broke apart. Instead, she heard Cineron ask, "Everyone okay?" She opened her eyes to see that an emergency lighting system had kicked in, providing adequate, if rather dim, illumination. Just like every other emergency system she had ever been forced to depend on, Rowan thought as she made herself let go of the chair and stand up along with everyone else. What the hell was it with emergency lighting systems? Why did they all have to be so goddamn dim? 445 years in the future, they could bring you back from the dead, but you still had to suffer eye strain and a power failure. "Would somebody mind telling me what the hell just happened?" Janessa demanded, her attempt to sound angry completely undercut by the way her voice was shaking, along with her entire body. She was looking at the co-pilot with what was supposed to be an imperious glare. But the man seemed to be too dazed to know who she was, much less answer. "Nothing," Lowe said quickly, straightening up in an effort to assert himself as being in charge. "Nothing happened. Everything's all right. We just overshot, that's all. We'll turn her around and go back." As if on cue, the ship shuddered one last time and then was still. "What was that?" Janessa asked. "Oh my God," said Waylander. He and Cineron stood in front of the monitor they had been watching earlier. "It's Solaris." "What about it?" Janessa snapped, her voice trembling worse than ever. "It's gone." Waylander's eyes were wide in his solemn face. "Solaris is gone." Kinsa suddenly came to life from where she was sitting on the floor, her head snapping up so sharply that her long dark hair flew back from her face. "What do you mean it's gone? Solaris is a city. It's a whole fucking city. It can't be gone." Waylander swiveled the monitor around so the screen was facing her. "Look for yourself, Kinsa." Rowan managed to sit down in the chair before her knees gave out completely. In some small, distant part of her mind, she was thinking that it must have been beautiful, whatever Solaris had originally looked like. An orbiting city with a clear view of the stars must have been something to see, not to mention the fact that the view from Solaris must have been equally breathtaking. Those enormous, silent starbursts that were consuming the last bits of what must have been building streets, perhaps even tree-lined boulevards and parks. It was like a gargantuan firework display. The absence of sound added a sort of haunting note, as it were. But it was a whole city blowing up. She couldn't wrap her mind around the thousands, perhaps even millions of deaths or the magnitude of destruction. The only thing she could comprehend was that they were all now trapped in one small spacecraft with Jason Voorhees, and everyone who could have protected them was now dead. "No, no, no, it can't be gone," Kinsa was insisting tearfully. "Where are we going to go? What are we going to do?" Rowan realized she had been saying the same thing over and over for quite some time. "Just shut the fuck up," Lowe roared at Kinsa suddenly. "I can't think with you screaming like that." Kinsa's high voice cut off. Janessa gave Lowe a poisonous look as she put her arms around the other woman and tried to comfort her. The professor ignored her and spoke into the comlink. "Lou, what sort of damage are we looking at?" No answer, of course. Rowan wiped a weary hand over her face. "Lou, answer me. Come on, what's the condition of the Grendel? Lou!" The professor tapped the comlink control on and off rapidly. "Lou, answer me. Are you there?" "I'm sending out a distress beacon," Cineron said. "Guys?" Janessa turned away from the viewport she had just opened the shield on. "We've lost our entire port pontoon." Rowan could see that this was definitely not the news anyone wanted to hear. "Internal pressure is holding. said KM, consulting some instrument in her hand, and sounding as calm and steady as ever. "However, our main thrusters are offline." Lowe nodded at her and turned to the co-pilot, Crutch, who was busy at a control panel. "Life support?" Crutch made a seesaw motion with one hand. "Far as I can tell, we should be okay for a while." "But he's out there," wailed Kinsa. Lowe rounded on her. "Look, we're gonna be fine," he shouted, actually blustering. "We're in a high-volume traffic lane. Another ship's gonna come by. I'm sure of it." He paused, waiting for someone to dare contradicting him. "We're going to be perfectly safe here." Rowan didn't even have time to wince at this statement before the hard pounding on the door began. They all stood motionless in the utter silence that followed. Hardly daring to breathe, Rowan kept her gaze riveted on the door, waiting for the pounding to begin again. Then dents would start to appear in the metal, and the door would crumple and buckle until Jason Voorhees was able to take hold of some bent portion and bend it even more, until he finally managed to peel the entire thing away from the frame and let himself in. But still there was no sound from the other side of the door, not a creak or a footstep. Rowan tiptoed cautiously across the room and stopped a few feet away from the door, straining her ears. "Maybe he gave up," said Waylander suddenly. "You think?" Janessa called from where she and Kinsa were huddled by the glass partition, as far away from the door as possible. Rowan couldn't tell whether she was being sarcastic or not, but she shushed them both anyways and listened for a little while longer before turning to look at the others. "I don't think he's out there." "You don't?" Janessa said, huddling near the glass panel in the far wall with Kinsa. "Why don't you just stick your head out and have a peek?" Rowan had no idea if this was also sarcasm or just terror showing as humor, and never had a chance to find out. The thought had barely formed in her mind when all at once the glass blew outward into the room with such tremendous force that for a split second Rowan thought that they had been hit by a piece of wreckage from the orbiting city. Then she saw a flash of metal wet with blood, and all thought stopped. Reflexively, she screamed and bolted for the door. Crutch had managed to get in only halfway open before it jammed, thanks to the dents that Jason had put in it. He grabbed her arm roughly and slung her through the opening as if he were trying to crack a whip, and she landed on her side in the hallway. A moment later, Janessa almost landed on top of her, followed by Kinsa. They helped each other up just in time to see Crutch himself coming out. KM's face appeared briefly in the opening before she pushed Waylander and Cineron out. "KM, come on, now!" Cineron said, scrambling to his feet. He started to run back towards the door just as KM slipped out into the hall, moving quickly but not hurrying, her usual composure intact, not even flinching when the door suddenly snapped shut behind her. "Come on!" Janessa yelled in her ear and grabbed her hand, pulling her along after herself and Kinsa. Rowan had a glimpse of Kinsa's bare legs covered with scratches from the flying glass. She was still in her underwear, Rowan thought. She had to fight for her life in her underwear. But then that was Jason Voorhees all over. Considering how the bastard usually did things, it was actually kind of miraculous that they all weren't in their underwear right now, or even less than that. Without warning, Janessa stopped short of the juncture where three hallways came together, almost getting herself flattened by Rowan and then Waylander, who was following close behind. Rowan looked around, wondering where they were now as she tried to collect herself. She didn't know her way around the ship. For that matter, she didn't know her way around any spaceship. She knew absolutely nothing about how big they were or how they were laid out. Janessa had said something about a pontoon, she remembered vaguely. Pontoons in outer space? What in the world for? God damn it! Rowan turned around to see KM walking gracefully through a door in the corridor just as it closed behind her. The android's face no longer looked entirely calm and collected. Then a shudder ran through the entire ship, followed by an eerie, echoing groan of metal buckling, and she understood why. They hadn't just destroyed Solaris when they'd crashed into it. They had seriously damaged their ship as well. Oh, Christ! Suddenly her legs felt very, very shaky. Rowan managed to prop herself up against the nearest wall and took a few slow, deep breaths. She was almost completely steady again when Kinsa suddenly spoke up in a small but anxious voice. "Where's Professor Lowe?" Rowan lifted her head with the distinct sensation of blood draining out of her face. Her gaze met Cineron's. Their lips moved in unison, forming the words, though neither of them spoke it aloud. The lab. Braithwaite Lowe stood in the middle of the laboratory and watched the big mass shape of Jason Voorhees, notorious murderer, come towards him. He hadn't been able to move before when Jason had smashed through the glass partition from Lab 2, in spite of the way everyone else ran for their lives. All he had been able to do was stand and watch them, the students, the thawed-out woman, the co-pilot, KM, as they wiggled through the malfunctioning door. He could have gone with them. He could have been with them now. He could have been right in the middle of them all, telling them to shut up every time they started screaming. But his feet had refused to move. No, not his feet, actually, but his legs. His legs had simply turned into a couple of stiff boards, no more mobile than chair legs, or one of Crutch's ridiculous terrarium stands. This had never, ever happened to him before. He had never been in the kind of situation where he literally couldn't move. He was the teacher, the leader, and he should have been leading the way out of the lab, leading his kids to safety. On the other hand, Jason Voorhees was his find. As the leader, he could just lay things out for him. Once he knew where he was and what things were like now, he might also understand that Lowe was his best friend, and rather than trying to execute him or freeze him, he was going to make him rich and famous. Yeah, that would do it, Lowe thought, as Jason Voorhees stalked towards him, with the autopsy saw blade in his hand. That had to do it. People said you couldn't reason with a homicidal maniac, but probably nobody had ever even tried offering the one thing everyone, including homicidal maniacs, wanted: limitless wealth. Money was the great equalizer, the universal cure, the size that fits all. That would do it for sure. Please let that do it for sure, Lowe thought, as Jason stopped directly in front of him. He forced himself to smile up at the scratched, featureless mask. So, hey, look, Jason. Can I call you Jason? Have you considered how valuable you are? He said. Lowe's use of his name seemed to be some kind of stimulus. His head tilted slightly to one side, and he moved closer to Lowe, who was unable to keep himself from backing away. I'm serious here, Lowe went on. Fame, money, with my help, you can have it all. He felt his back hit the console and knew he was now out of wiggle room, nowhere else to go. But Jason just kept coming at him. I know people, he babbled desperately, imploringly. Up close, he could see splatters of blood mixed with clots of black something on the layers of rags that served as clothing, as well as countless bullet holes. Brodsky's team had shot him up so much he should have clinked when he walked. Not that he should have been walking at all. I know all the right people. I have connections, and I know how to use them, Lowe promised, trying to slide out from between Jason and the console. All you have to do is name it, and I can get it for you. No matter what it is, I can have it for you like that. He pretended that his fingers weren't too sweaty to snap. It was the thought that really counted. The noise was optional. Together, we can make a fortune. More than a fortune. We can. Jason Voorhees leaned forward and Lowe dodged to the right, flinching a little in anticipation of one of those big hands grabbing him around the neck. But Jason didn't even look at him. He was reaching for something on a tray near the Nanotech 2000. That's funny. You don't look like a techie, Lowe's brain jabbered. Then he saw what Jason had picked up. Oh shit. Oh well. Oh, you want your machete back? Lowe's heart seemed to be flopping like a beached fish in his chest as relief and terror fought to claim him. Shit! Just go ahead and take it. It's yours. Hey, just remember who saved it for you. Okay, buddy? Jason transferred the autopsy knife to his other hand as he made a close and careful study of the machete, turning it one way and then the other, like a man examining a treasured possession for any possible damage. no matter how slight. Which only made sense, Lowe thought. You couldn't have a notorious murderer without the notorious murder weapon. It would have been like having Jack the Ripper without his knife or Lizzie Borden without her axe. Historically inaccurate, inexcusably disrespectful. But thanks to his having had the presence of mind to retrieve the machete, his conscience wouldn't have to suffer the burden of guilt for having insulted a historical figure, Lowe thought. Ergo, relief could now triumph over terror, and any second now it would. Lowe took another small step away from Jason. Immediately the mask turned towards him. At the same moment he seemed to remember the autopsy blade in his other hand and paused, holding it up next to the old machete in obvious comparison. Lowe could see his one good eye glinting as it swiveled from one to the other and back again. Should he offer a suggestion? Lowe wondered. Or would that be inappropriate? He did have quite a lot of expert knowledge, but Jason was the actual practicing killer. As much as he might feel there was really only one expert in the room, and anything Lowe had to say would be unwelcome. Better to keep his ideas on that subject to himself, Lowe decided, and put another inch between himself and Jason. His gaze went briefly and longingly to the door. Had things reached the point where he could leave the room just for a minute, just for a bathroom break? Or would Jason take it amiss? Perhaps if you didn't act like a scared victim, then he wouldn't treat you like one. That had to work. It made perfect sense. Please let it work, Lowe prayed, with no idea who or what he was praying to. Careful not to look away from Jason, he groped around behind himself for the comlink on the console. "Whew! Hey guys, come on back, it's okay," he said, hoping he had actually opened the channel for shipwide address. "He just wanted his machete back. Whew!" Jason was looking at him again. Lowe tried to smile on him, doing his best not to think about how the two blades he was holding made a kind of lethal frame. "Whew! Oh, you scared me, big guy. You're not going to regret this." "Whew!" Lowe jabbered at him. "You're really not. You'll see that I can do everything. I'll do everything I promised and more." Abruptly, Jason tossed the old machete over his shoulder and transferred the autopsy blade back to his right hand. Once more unable to move, Lowe watched as Jason raised the gleaming instrument high over his head. Not ambidextrous, then, said a small, distant voice in his mind. Chapter 15. Rowan felt the long, agonized wail that echoed through the ship run right through her body. Her gaze met Cineron's again. The only color in his desolate face came from the green-tinged emergency lighting, and she thought for sure that he was going to pitch forward in a dead faint. KM moved closer to him as if sensing the same thing. She probably had, Rowan thought. There was probably a lot more to her than a fancy artificial intelligence. Cineron had probably built in all sorts of sensors and detectors, and Christ knew what else, so she could take care of humans under any circumstances. This was what they had in the 24th century, instead of the Swiss Army knife. Bottle opener, corkscrew, nail file, brain surgeon, rocket scientist, bodyguard, even a fourth for bridge if necessary. If, say, a homicidal maniac with a machete broke up the game. "What do we do now?" asked Janessa quietly. She looked as green as Cineron. They all did. "Anyone have any ideas?" "Well," Kinsey got up from the railing she had been half sitting on and gave them all a pained, apologetic smile that was closer to a grimace. "I think I'll just go to my room now. Stone is going to meet me there." Janessa put both arms around the girl and pushed her head down on her shoulder, pressing her own cheek against Kinsa's to keep her there. It was an awkward position, since Kinsa was actually a couple of inches taller than she was, but Kinsa didn't protest or try to pull away. The sight made Rowan feel as if her heart was about to break. She had to look away or risk bursting into tears. "How do we get off this ship?" She looked from Waylander to Cineron to Crutch and back again, hoping she sounded brusque and businesslike, rather than weepy and terrorized. "I don't know," Waylander said, glancing at Cineron, who was frowning down at the floor thoughtfully. "Well, can you beam us off or something?" Rowan asked, seizing on the first idea that came into her head. "Beam us off?" Waylander stared at her, utterly mystified. Cineron looked up sharply. "The shuttle!" Waylander's face went from puzzled to stunned, but only for a moment. "Hell yeah, the shuttle," he said, breaking into an enormous grin. "Crutch, how about it?" The gypsy fortune-teller nodded, looking equally hopeful. "Sure, I can do pre-launch from the bridge. We'll have to rework the navigational module because it only set up for a short haul, but that's nothing. That's easy." "And we'll go to the shuttle, set it up for refueling, and start to check off," Janessa added, including Rowan with a look. "Crutch, call when you're ready to reroute the fuel." "Will do," he said. "Waylander, you're with me. The rest of you be careful. Watch your backs." They split into two groups, Crutch and Waylander hurrying up a different hallway to the bridge, while the rest of them continued straight along the one they were in, which put Jason Voorhees behind them, Rowan told herself. Even if she didn't know her way around the ship, she could orient herself that much. As long as they kept going in a straight line, she would know that they were moving away from Jason, not towards him. They passed through another larger juncture that opened into a platform at the top of a short flight of stairs. Kinsa had barely started down them when she suddenly screamed and turned away, with both hands over her face. Janessa reached her first and put both arms around her, but whatever soothing thing she had been about to say turned into a horrible, horrified gasp. A moment later, Rowan understood why. The veritable lake of blood would have been bad enough. The fact that the corpse lying in the middle of it was missing everything from the waist down made it unbearable. Even worse was the smear outside of the pool. It was exactly as wide as the dead man's waist and very long, horribly, dreadfully long, trailing away to vanish into a shadowy area too many horrible yards away. Rowan held on to the railing, waiting for her body to decide whether it was going to faint or not. The buzzing in her ears waxed and waned with equal intensity. It was as much the smell as the sight that went with it. That awful charnel house stink of blood recently spilled and now souring outside the body. So much of it in one place. It was kind of amazing that she hadn't smelled it well before she had reached the stairs. Now it was all she could smell, and if she had to stand there with it in her nose for very much longer, it might be the only thing she would ever smell from now on. Then Cineron brushed past her on his way down, and somehow the contact woke her up and brought her mind back into sharp focus. Quickly she trotted down the steps after him. Kneeling on the bottom step, he reached over and managed to extricate the enormous assault weapon the dead man had been clutching to his chest. Rowan wondered if he was just being a good soldier and keeping it out of the blood. Christ, what kind of a thing was that to think in a moment like this? She distracted herself by bending down and taking the gun from Cineron. "Hey, be careful," he said. "You know how to use one of those things?" The weapon seemed to fall into the firing position in her arms automatically. It was surprisingly light for its size, much lighter than the gun she had used to drive Jason into the cryostasis unit, and just as easy to figure out. "Sure," she said, raising it to her shoulder to look down the sight. It was actually a screen that not only aimed for her, but advised as to the most effective distance, depending on the target. This was one very nice, very lethal killing tool. Her gaze fell on the dead man again, but it still couldn't kill Jason. She shoved the thought firmly away. "Sure, I can use it," she said. "It's like riding a bike. Once you do it, you never forget how." "Yeah, but that's a lot more complicated," Cineron said, standing up. "That's a BFG. It's a special weapon used only by the military." Frowning, Rowan looked from the gun to Cineron. "So what's BFG supposed to stand for, big fucking gun?" "Well, actually, yes," put in Crutch, sounding mildly surprised. "You're kidding, aren't you?" Janessa asked incredulously. "No," Crutch said, looking at all of them. "BFG really stands for big fucking gun. I thought everybody knew that." "Great, that's settled," Cineron said quickly. "Waylander, you're with Crutch. KM and I will go up to the supply hold and pick up everything we can. We'll all meet up at the shuttle bay, okay?" "Fine," Janessa called after him as he and KM vaulted over the side of the stairs to avoid the pool of blood. She turned to Rowan and gestured towards the shadowy area of the cargo bay. "Now, what's a bike?" The moment the door to the bridge opened, Crutch put a hand over his nose and mouth and turned away. Oh, shit. Roger that, agreed Waylander, taking a step back and breathing through his mouth. It didn't seem to help. Crutch reached around and felt around the wall just to the left of the doorway. Oh, found it. Hang on a second. Waylander heard an airy sound like a cross between a whisper and a hum. Fresh air puffed into his face and turned the sweat on his scalp cool, raising goosebumps. Custom ventilation system, Crutch explained. Absolute necessity when your pilot won't eat anything that doesn't stink. Waylander raised his eyebrows. Really? Hell yeah, in Lowe's case, BFG stood for big fucking garlic. Crutch blew out a short breath that wasn't a laugh. Okay, I think that ought to do it, he said, stepping inside. Waylander followed, careful to keep his breathing shallow until he was sure he wouldn't choke. Crutch started towards the co-pilot's console, and then stopped suddenly, staring. Waylander followed his gaze to what seemed to be a lot of red rags thrown carelessly around the pilot's chair and the control panel. Then his eyes refocused. Oh, God, he murmured, feeling his stomach turn over. God, that's fucking twisted. Poor bastard, said Crutch, sounding as sick as Waylander felt. Son of a bitch tore him limb from limb, and then tore up the pieces some more. Yeah, I can see that. Waylander bit back the retort and looked away. Of course, I've seen worse, Crutch added, adjusting the bandana tied around his head. I haven't, Waylander said. Thank Christ. Crutch sighed and went over to the control panel for the shuttle. Let's get to work, boy. Cineron slammed another set of armaments into a third travel pack and then grabbed another sidearm from Brodsky's weapons locker. Rowan might have felt confident with the BFG, but he had never been able to get used to anything larger than one of these two-handers. Well, he needed two hands, unlike Brodsky. All he could do was hope for better luck than Brodsky had had. There's enough firepower here to level a moon, he said, looking over what he and KM had gathered already. Grab what you can and let's head back to the shuttle. KM added 2 more packs of ammo to the collection along with the BFG and went to raid more of the lockers. Cineron watched her for a long moment. She worked with her usual composure, but something about the expression on her face was giving him the feeling that he had missed several Cascade incidents again. Several more on top of the ones he had already missed. He remembered how he had planned to run a thorough diagnostic at the earliest opportunity. So much for that idea. So what do you think, KM? He blurted as she turned around with her arms full of hardware. She looked at him questioningly. You think we're going to make it? Our statistical probability of survival is 13%, she told him. 13%? Cineron pounded his fist on the counter, where they had piled the supplies they were taking with them. Bullshit! That's bullshit, KM! Can't you do any better than that? KM drew herself up slightly. Her expression almost hurt now. I did not choose those odds. Preparing the shuttle for launch may be a relatively simple process, but getting there alive, she shook her head, is a problem. God! Cineron massaged his forehead with one hand. Is there any way we can improve those odds? The anxious expression on KM's face was suddenly replaced by something completely new. A look that Cineron had never really seen before and wasn't sure how to read. There was something of recklessness and hope, and a light in her eyes that he would have called feverish if she'd been human. And then all of a sudden he realized that her expression was actually a mirror of his own, and he understood perfectly. He reached for her, but she was already in his arms. While Cineron was not the most experienced man on Earth, too, or even on the Grendel, he had been fortunate enough to be on the receiving end of some classic kisses, including a couple that had been about as close to perfect as anything ever could be. But kissing KM took him to a whole new level. In terms of the strictly tactile, she felt no different than any human woman, but the similarity began and ended there. KM kissed him with undivided attention and unbroken concentration, and she put everything that she was behind it. As a result, everything he was responded to her. Arousal ran through his entire body like internal lightning. Finally, they break apart. but only because he needed to come out for air. KM gazed into his eyes, looking even more feverish. Statistical probability for survival just went up to 53%. Wow, he said. One kiss jumped us up 40%? She nodded. The huge smile spreading across his face felt like his own personal sunrise. Want to go for 100? She did. According to Janessa, cutting through the cargo bay was the most direct and therefore quickest route to the shuttle bay. Plus, she insisted, it was good strategy. Knowing that he had killed everyone in the cargo bay, Jason would be looking elsewhere for new victims. Rowan had to admit it was a pretty good thinking, especially by a college student who dressed like a sci-fi geek's wet dream and didn't know what a bike was. No, that was wrong. Rowan scolded herself silently as she moved through the shadows with the BFG up and ready. She was being catty and unfair to Janessa. It was good thinking for anybody, but particularly for someone who was also looking after a hysterical classmate and doing a damn good job of it. Janessa didn't deserve her scorn any more than she deserved to suffer a violent, bloody death at the hands of Jason Voorhees. She was just a kid. They were all just kids, all of them who were left, except the gypsy-looking co-pilot Crutch, Rowan thought. Although if she went strictly by age, her literal chronological age put her close to 500. Then even Crutch was a kid in comparison. They were all kids, and she was the Eminence Grace, the gray-haired elder, who also happened to be the only one with first-hand experience in dealing with Jason. "We're doomed," said a tiny voice in her mind. She squelched it immediately, as hard as she could. Impatient with herself, she paused and looked back at Janessa, who was following closely behind with her arm around Kent's trembling shoulders. "Keep going straight," Janessa whispered. "T-junction coming up," Rowan whispered back. Janessa made a baffled face. "A what?" "There's a path leading off to the left up ahead," Rowan said patiently. "Do we turn or keep going straight?" "Go straight," Janessa told her. "We're over halfway there." Rowan nodded. She paused to wipe her sweaty hands on her pants, first one and then the other, earning a soft but audible tisking noise from Janessa. Her clothes, Rowan remembered and smiled inwardly. If she had been Janessa, she probably wouldn't have been too happy to see someone treating her pants that way either. "I promise I'll either pay to have them cleaned or I'll replace them," she promised the other woman silently as she took a firmer grip on the BFG and kept moving. Just before she reached the T-junction, she stopped again and held up a hand to tell the two women behind her to do the same. All the soldiers had been killed in there, Rowan thought bleakly. While she thought that 3 of them, with no combat training whatsoever, had any chances of getting through alive, was probably a sign of incipient madness. Bracing herself, she stepped forward and aimed the BFG down the intersecting pathway. 2 long, bloody poles were protruding through a closed door. The blood was still fresh enough that it was dripping off the pointed ends. Rowan jumped, letting out a little gasp at the sight. Immediately, the other 2 women were at her side, before she could warn them off. Kensa let out a shaky cry and put her hand over her mouth, refusing to let Janessa turn her away. From somewhere farther down the pathway came a noise like something being dragged on the floor. All 3 women jumped, and Kensa let out another cry. "Oh my God, it's him, isn't it?" she said, tears running down her face. He's come back. He's in here with us. He's gonna kill..." Rowan slung the BFG by the shoulder strap and clapped her hand over Kensa's mouth. "Shut up." Kensa whimpered, an unintelligible protest. "I mean it," she whispered fiercely, so close to Kensa's ear that her lips brushed against it. "You make another sound and I swear I'll snap your neck myself." Kensa froze, not even breathing now, as she stared at Rowan with wide, frightened eyes. "You sure are good with people," Janessa said artfully. "I'm trying to listen," Rowan said, deliberately unapologetic. She let go of the terrified Kensa and raised the BFG again, shining the flashlight down past the bloody spikes. The noise came again, and Rowan thought she saw movement just outside the circle of light. All at once, the entire overhead lighting system for the cargo bay flickered on for a fraction of a second. before going dark again, just long enough to give Rowan the impression of someone face down on the floor and stirring ever so slightly. My God, she breathed, trying to shine her flashlight beam on the same area. I think there's someone alive over there. I didn't see anything, Janessa said. Rowan looked at her and saw that she wasn't just being contrary. Rowan, we don't have much time, she asked. I know, Rowan. Up in a moment. This way is the Get ahead. Okay, you two go on ahead. I'll catch up. Janessa caught her arm as she started to move cautiously down the pathway towards the bloody poles. I'll be all right, Rowan said, doing her best not to sound impatient. The two of you just go. Kinsa was already on her way, but Janessa hesitated. All right, she said dubiously, but just... She made a pained face at Rowan. Don't ruin my pants, okay? It's a deal, Rowan said and gave her a little push. Now go! Janessa hesitated for half a second and then took off after Kinsa. Come on, girl, Rowan heard her say. We're going home. Rowan winced as she moved along the narrow pathway. God, I hope so. She had intended simply to duck under the bloody poles and keep moving. Instead, she found she couldn't help coming to a complete stop. Blood was still dripping from the metal, big, irregular clots of it, and now that she was getting a closer look, pieces of tissue. If she ducked under the poles, it would drip down on her. Oh, you poor, poor baby, said a voice in her mind acidly. You might get some blood on you. What's wrong? Isn't the blood of a soldier who got slaughtered while trying to protect you good enough for you? Rowan swallowed hard. No, it's that I'm not good enough for it. Then she shook herself. Get a fucking grip, she muttered. Lose the fucking melodrama already. Still, her body refused to crouch down. Instead, she flattened herself against the opposite wall and sidled past the pointed ends, half expecting them to suddenly drive forward and run her through. Then she was past them, feeling foolish and guilty, and full of sorrow for whoever had to die for Lowe's valuable scientific artifacts. She reached the end of the passageway and found herself facing a more open area of smaller crates and containers. Quickly, she swept the light back and forth, her finger poised over the trigger. Maybe she should fire anyways, spray everything in front of her, just as a precaution. Then she heard a shuddery sigh off to her right. How she managed to stop herself before putting a million more holes in Brodsky to go with the 2 ragged wounds he already had was beyond her ability to understand. Brodsky! She rushed over to where he was slumped with his back against a large metal crate. Now she knew whose blood was dripping from those poles, she thought, looking at the holes in his midsection. God, how was he still alive? He turned to look at her, his dark face covered with sweat, and smiled with half his mouth. Hi, he whispered. Hi back at ya, she said, slinging the BFG over her shoulder. I'm getting you out of here. They're refueling the shuttle. We're leaving. She took hold of his shoulders with either hand, then thought better of it and slipped her hands under his arms instead. Okay, on 3, she added as his head dropped back against the crate, and he closed his eyes. He was still breathing, though. She could feel it. Brodsky, are you with me? Stay with me. On 3, she repeated. He shook his head. 1, 2, 3. Her last word was lost in a grunt of effort, which had absolutely no effect on Brodsky other than to make him grimace in pain. She might as well have been trying to lift a building. Oh, God, I'm sorry, she said, letting go of him. She wiped his face with the back of her hand just to be able to do something for him. I'm sorry, I can't lift you. You're too heavy for me. I'll have to get help. He caught one of her hands in his. Just save yourselves. Get the hell out of here. I'm not leaving you, Rowan said hotly. I'm not. I won't. I'll be right back with help, I promise. Brodsky let his hand fall away as his eyes closed again. But he was still breathing, Rowan saw. He was still breathing, and she was going to make damn sure that didn't change. She got up and ran back down the hallway, barely hesitating at the poles, this time as she dashed for the shuttle.
It's okay, he just wanted his machete back! Whew!
Okay, this has been chapters 14 and 15 of Jason X. This is one of my favorite parts of the movie. I had so much fun narrating Lowe's death scene. One of my favorite lines from any Jason movie right there. It's okay, guys. He just wanted his machete back. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comments section what you're thinking of the book so far, and I'll be back soon with even more of Jason X. We're getting into the really good part of the story now. Can't wait to see how it all plays out in the book form. Till next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, it's okay, guys. He just wanted his machete back.